Today we look at 2 Kings 4, 5, and 6, and some of the miracles of Elisha. Chapter 4 begins with the wife of a member of the company of prophets cried to Elisha, came to him. And so, Elisha is with the king or with this other group of prophets. He isn't by himself a lot like Elijah was, but he's with this group, and this is whom he worked with on a regular basis. But the wife of one of them comes and says that, my husband has died, and the person that we are indebted to is going to take my children as slaves in payment for this debt that is owed. And this was maybe not a common practice, but an accepted practice, that if someone died and owed someone else money, the children would be slaves to pay the debt off. It's a terrible situation. But the woman comes to Elisha with the problem. And the only thing she has is this jar of oil. And of course, oil is used for cooking. It was, oil and bread, and, oil is a big part of a lot of things that we cook today too. If you're going to make pancakes, you put oil in it. You may know there's oils, but it was a valuable product, and it would be crushed out of plants that way. But he says to her, go and gather all of the oil vessels from all of your neighbors and bring them in and start pouring from this little jar of oil you have. And the oil never runs out until every vessel that they've been able to gather is full. And she's able to sell that oil then and pay off the debt and live that way. And, and this is what verse 7, go sell the oil, pay your debts, and you and your children can live on the rest. So there was an abundance. And this is just one of the pictures of God. And it's just a reminder of John 10:10. I have come that they may have life and have it abundantly. And this is God's love and grace. There's an abundance of it. Another day, in verse 8, Elisha was passing through a town where a wealthy woman lived, and she urged him to stop and have a meal. And he came to do that as a practice. This was a house that he would stop at. And this woman then said to her husband, well, let's make a place for Elisha, the prophet, to spend the time when he comes. And he felt indebted to them, and then found out that she had no children and her husband was old. And I think that was kind of common as well, that, an older man would marry a younger woman, and sometimes, they weren't able to have children. We know how those things work. But Elisha says to her, you will have a child. By this time next year, you have a child. And she, of course, is somewhat in disbelief, but she does. She has a child in her old age. And this is, we've seen that before with Abraham and Sarai. We're going to see it with, in the New Testament with Zechariah and Elizabeth having the child John the Baptist. It's one of the good things that God does for people sometimes. Maybe I shouldn't say it that way, but so she has a child. The child grows up, and one day the child goes out to field with his father, and the child has a headache, doesn't feel good, comes home and dies. And she says to one of the servants, call the donkey, I want to go to the prophet. And then it's neither the Sabbath nor a new moon. You only go to the prophet, you go to church on Sunday mornings, right? We don't usually seek out the church or that, otherwise. But it was, well, why are you going today? And she says, just don't pay any attention, just do this. And she went, and she told Elisha then what happened to her son. And he's going to send his servant with a staff, with his walking staff, not a staff of people, but the woman is persistent. I will not go unless you come with me. So while the servant goes ahead, Elisha comes with the woman, and when they get there, the child is still lifeless. Elisha goes into the room, just the two of them, he and this dead son, lifeless son, maybe I should say, and he lays on this son. He breathes into this son, and he eye to eye, face to face, and gets up and nothing has happened. He does it the second time, and the son comes to life, and he calls her and says, "Take your son." And so he raised this son, a lifeless body, back to life. He returned then to Gilgal, and there was a famine came across the land, and somebody went out and gathered some produce, some wild things that were growing, not knowing what they were, and put them in the pot of stew, not knowing that it was poisonous. Someone else figured out it was, and they said, "We cannot eat this. All of this is going to be wasted." And Elijah takes some flour and tosses it into the pot, and it is then purified, and it is made safe for the people to consume that way. Another person in verse 42 brings some first fruits, 20 loaves of barley and some fresh ears of grain in his sack. Fresh ears of grain, is that corn on the cob? Or is it, heads of wheat? Whichever. But, it's not enough to feed all of the people. And that comment is made. And Elisha simply says, "Put the food before them and let them eat." And they ate, and they had some left, according to the word of the Lord. And again, we saw Jesus feed 4,000. We saw Jesus feed 5,000. We saw Jesus, multiply the fishes, and, on the shore after his resurrection too. He took the fish and he fed his disciples then. And so it's, a lot of things that we see in the New Testament with Jesus, we see some of those same miracles that God has performed through his prophets in the Old Testament. Chapter 5, Naaman is a commander of the army of the king of Aram, and he has leprosy. And he goes to the king and he complains about it. And someone in the king's service says, "Oh, if only he was in Israel, where is the prophet? The prophet would be able to cure him." And the king of Aram sends a letter along with this king Naaman to the king of Israel. Heal my commander. And the king of Israel says, "Who am I? I can't do that, And one of the servants of the king of Israel says, "There is the prophet. Take him to Elisha." And so they send this commander Naaman to Elisha. Familiar story, I don't understand that, but it's one of those things that it's just a reminder for us, I think, that, the prophet doesn't even bother to come out to talk to Naaman. Send a servant out, and Naaman is, he's, "Here I am, what are you going to do?" And the servant says to Naaman, according to the word of the prophet Elisha, "Go and wash in the Jordan River 7 times and you'll be healed." And that doesn't sound like a very good healing advice, does it? And of course, Naaman is upset, and he says, "Well, our rivers are much more powerful and much more impressive than this Jordan River." He said, and he's angered, and he's not going to do it. However, one of his servants or one of the soldiers or someone says to him, "But, if the prophet gave you a hard task, you would attempt it, correct? So why not do something that seems simple?" So Naaman does. He goes and he immerses himself 7 times in the river, and he's healed. A miracle. And he goes back then to the prophet, going to give him something, a reward, pay him. And Elisha says, no, nothing is due, nothing is due. And he then leaves, Naaman does. But one of the servants of Elisha figures, I'm going to go get something for me, and he sneaks off after this guy, and he says, "Well, for 2 talents of silver and some clothes, this is, the prophet decided, we should have some." Well, that backfired too, because then when Elisha knew what had happened, and this servant then is covered with the leprosy, not only himself, but his descendants as well. And chapter 6, the company of prophets says, "You can see this place we live under your charge is too small. Let us go to the Jordan and collect logs and build a bigger palace." And they do that, and they cut down trees, and while they're cutting trees down, the axe head falls into the water, and he cries out, "My axe head has fallen into the water and it's gone," and this is a disaster, a catastrophe. And Elisha says, "Where did it fall?" and he's shown the place. He then cuts off a stick, tosses it out there, and this iron axe head floats. I mean, we know that iron doesn't float, but, you know, it's again the example of the ability of God over the heavens and the earth. I mean, God is creator and maker of all, and all things react to God that way. And then there was the king of Aram. You know, we just heard about Naaman, the commander of the army, and the king of Aram. Well, he decides he's going to do some warring against the king of Israel. But the prophets continue to thwart the plans, and we see the Elisha praying to the Lord, and all of these things happening, and we see again throughout chapter 6 how God then leads and delivers the people of Israel from the enemy from the army of the enemy. And it's just, you know, it's just amazing to see and to remember again as we read through this again, just to remember the power and the love and the abilities of God to work in and through his people.